Tonight we are met with the tragic aftermath of the earthquake in Esmeraldas, Ecuador. Over 1 million people were affected by this earthquake. I had the privilege of talking to some survivors at the scene and shedding light on their experiences. I'm here at the scene joined with Jimmy talking about his experience. My question to you is, how prepared were you for this earthquake?
Not at all. Me and my family were visiting from America to see the sights, and it caught everybody by surprise. There was a lot of chaos ensuing, and there was not. It did not seem like anybody was prepared at all, and we had to seek shelter at some elevated ground.
As you can see, they were not prepared for this situation, and we'll be on to the next person. Next, I'm joined with Jessica at the scene. How are you and your family members feeling after the earthquake?
We're really scared. Our house completely collapsed because of this earthquake. Thankfully, my family's okay, but we're really struggling to find new shelter and aid in this situation.
I'm hoping that you guys do find good aid and good shelter. We will be talking about later on in this segment possible places we can find aid and other things like that with more people to come. Thank you. Lastly, I'm joined here with Jose. Do you feel there's been adequate aid in the aftermath of this tragic event?
No, not at all. There's not enough adequate funding so far. Many of us have been left to struggle.
Unfortunately, this is the harsh aftermath here in Ecuador. There have been relief funds such as Resource Foundation and American Red Cross, but with the damage being 2 to 3 billion, funding is imminent. Our thoughts and prayers are with those survivors and those who have lost their lives. Thank you to all the survivors that we have interviewed. There's been mass devastation to Esmeraldas. We have learned that the magnitude is estimated to be 7.8 and killing 700 so far, with many more critically injured. As we saw, many infrastructures have been leveled completely. We are now going to be joined by a local teacher, Faye, and Ethan, a local relief worker, to talk about possible mitigation strategies to help be prepared in another earthquake.
I'm Ethan. I'm a first responder with the local fire department, and currently we have every source of relief organization performing search and rescue at the moment. There's a lot of damage and wreckage that we have to sort through to save people and families. There are currently 33 missing persons, roughly 5,000 people injured, 22,000 people displaced by the earthquake, roughly 10,000 buildings damaged, 720,000 people require humanitarian assistance. While we work with search and rescue, we are providing an emergency shelter to house those whose shelter was destroyed while we assess the zones of impact. Private companies and foundations provided humanitarian assistance by donating supplies such as food rations and snacks, personal hygiene kits, blankets, medicines, water, clothes, and even mattresses, and other essentials to aid families, but we need a lot more supplies and need a lot more hands on deck.
Thank you, Ethan. Next, we will be joined by Faye, a local teacher in Esmeraldas.
This earthquake impacted 300 schools with about 120,000 children affected. It is important that we are more prepared for this to happen again. In order to ensure this, we plan on implementing a preparedness curriculum for our kids to understand. It may be helpful to teach in depth what an actual earthquake is like and the kind of impact it could have in the future. It is important to show them real-life videos and impacts. However, a lot of these kids already have first-hand experience with a disaster like this. It is important for them to understand the science behind it and how it could be different depending on the cause and location of the epicenter. For safety, first we will start implementing safety kits in all classrooms for the next time an earthquake strikes. Then we will start teaching kids methods like the drop, cover, and hold on method, and practice them school-wide with drills. These drills will ensure that when the time does come for the next earthquake, these students will already know what to do and won't be caught in the panic of it all and won't be confused on what the next steps are. It is also important that these steps to new safety procedures are shared with all staff members through drills for them as well and first aid classes.
Thank you, Ethan and Faye. They provided insightful information on mitigation strategies. Joining us next, David, giving us some insightful information on possible architectural solutions to help maintain these buildings and prevent leveling of the town's structures.
After seeing the destruction of many buildings in the area, we can present several solutions for Esmeraldas. The province of Esmeraldas is dependent on the exportation of raw materials such as timber, African palm, and agriculture, with its coastal city of Esmeraldas, which was most heavily affected by the earthquake, being a central port of trade and exports in shrimp, fish, timber, and of course, bananas. The province has some industry revolving around its oil production for Ecuador and needs to see improvements in order to facilitate possible mitigation strategies revolving around infrastructure. For Ecuadorians in Esmeraldas, possible solutions to better prepare for future earthquakes would be to reinforce the structures of buildings and houses by using flexible foundations, steel skeletons, and shock absorbers. The earthquake has destroyed thousands of houses, leaving hundreds of thousands of people in assistance. Many of the structures in Esmeraldas have been severely damaged or destroyed completely because the material used to construct them in the first place could not have withstood the vibrations caused by such massive earthquakes like we saw with the 7.8 magnitude one that struck here just now. Therefore, we propose a practical solution of basing houses along with small and medium-sized structures like shops and stores off of Japan's earthquake-resistant Menshin, or in English, seismic isolation buildings. Both Ecuador and Japan are heavily affected by the Ring of Fire, experiencing a large amount of earthquakes, typically above 7.0 in magnitude. With this one hitting Esmeraldas directly being 7.8 in magnitude, Japan's mentioned structures can sustain with minimal damage against earthquakes up to around 7.0 in magnitude without collapsing. These structures work by placing flexible layers of rubber and lead materials in between the foundations of the buildings and the actual building itself in order to minimize the effect of tremors. Yes, the earthquake that just hit Esmeraldas was 7.8 in magnitude, but this building method will reduce the overall damage done to buildings and possibly keep them from collapsing. For the actual structure of these small and medium buildings, which Esmeraldas is primarily comprised of, adding a flexible steel skeleton with the structure of these buildings. Flexible steel skeletons work by absorbing the energy produced from an earthquake's seismic wave to keep them from crumbling. The steel mesh used to connect skeletons would further reinforce walls and roofing, reducing the chance of collapse. Essentially, rebuilding Esmeraldas using Japan's seismic isolation buildings with flexible steel skeletons combined with a steel mesh connective netting would drastically reduce the damage to many of these structures hit by earthquakes with moderately high magnitudes that would otherwise demolish entire cities, as we have just seen. For taller buildings than Esmeraldas, future construction of buildings basing themselves off of New Mexico's Torre Mayor, which uses diamond-shaped fluid viscous dampers and shock absorbers to resist the resonating effect of earthquakes with magnitudes up to 8.5, which is larger than the one that just hit Esmeraldas. These dampers convert kinetic energy produced by earthquakes into heat energy, which then dissipates into a hydraulic fluid and therefore safely keeping the structure of the building by allowing limited movement. This building is in New Mexico's area most prone to earthquakes, and engineers and architects worldwide agree that this is one of the strongest and most earthquake-proof buildings on Earth. Therefore, for Esmeraldas and its coastal city, rebuilding taller structures using the dampers like seen on the Torre Mayor to keep them from overswaying and ultimately collapsing is more than a reasonable solution. If the province of Esmeraldas can get the proper funding, thousands of lives can be saved in this zone, which is extremely prone to large earthquakes.
Thank you, David. As you heard, this is some very helpful architectural strategies in earthquake preparedness. Lastly, we will be joined by Jake, head of local nonprofit for raising funding for relief.
The government of Ecuador helped out and delivered nearly 362,000 emergency food kits, 300,000 liters of water, and almost 1,000 hygiene kits, and 100 of clothing sets. The government also deployed tens of thousands of armed forces, police, firefighters, and volunteers. Ecuador also got a $364 million loan, but most likely won't be enough since the reconstruction cost is estimated to be about $3.3 billion. Even though there were tons of reliefs, there are still a ton of families that are not getting the help that they need. We suggest that Ecuador focus more of their budget to earthquake mitigation strategies.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you to all of the researchers, survivors, and more for joining us on this segment. We have learned that Esmeraldas needs funding, new architecture, and disaster education. That's all from us, folks, and once again, our thoughts and prayers are with the city of Esmeraldas. Thank you for tuning in. Is this thing on?
Thank you, Jake, and thank you to all the researchers, survivors, and more for joining us on this segment. We have learned that Esmeraldas needs funding, new architecture, and disaster education. That's all from us, folks. And once again, our thoughts and prayers are with the Esmeraldas. Thank you for tuning in. God bless.
With the Esmeraldas.